Most people think of the phrase, "what you give is what you get," as some nice, simple life advice. But in reality, this principle has been embedded in cultures for centuries. It's a law of life, one that governs much more than we realize. Something people noticed, lived by, and passed down. Governments, thinkers, and spiritual leaders have all referenced it. However, this principle is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean just being kind and expecting a return. It's not about rewarding good actions or simply receiving what you wish for. The real depth of this principle is far more profound than that. It redefines what it means to give and what it truly means to receive. In Hermeticism, the principle of heaven is a system that underpins the very fabric of reality. It's easy to dismiss these ancient philosophies as outdated or abstract, but what Hermeticism says is incredibly relevant today. Reality isn't random. It doesn't simply happen to us. Instead, it runs on laws that shape everything. They aren't about good and evil in the conventional sense. These are laws about energy, how it moves, and how it reflects our inner state. Hermeticism doesn't say, "do good and you'll be rewarded." It says, "what you are, you attract." This truth lies behind two core laws. The law of correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. At first glance, the phrase may appear mystical. In practice, it reflects a familiar psychological pattern. Think of an individual operating from chronic anxiety. He, she may begin to interpret neutral interactions as signs of betrayal. Without evidence, they may project suspicion onto others, often misreading intention or tone. Over time, this behavior tends to create the very outcomes it fears, reinforcing the internal state through external experience. It is common for individuals to attempt change through external adjustments. Environment, routine, circumstance. But Hermeticists understand that the real work is done within. Consciousness, your life is like a mirror, and while it's tempting to scrub the glass, it's far smarter to clean what's standing in front of it. That is the first key. What you give internally, you receive externally. The law of vibration. Everything is energy. Everything moves. This one's more straightforward. You're always broadcasting, not just with your words, but with your thoughts, your emotions. Even when you are doing nothing, someone walks into a room and suddenly the entire vibe changes. There's heaviness, tension, calm, or even warmth in the air. It's not random. That's vibration, energy in motion, and just as you can feel it in others, they feel it in you. Whether you're aware of it or not, you're always sending out something. So, stack the two laws together and it becomes clear. One shows that your inner world becomes your outer reality. The second shows that what you emit emotionally becomes what you attract. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. Not because the universe rewards or punishes you, but because it's reflecting you. Christianity teaches the same principle, though it presents it with a divine twist. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verse 38, Jesus states, "Give and it will be given to you, for with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." At a surface level, this could be read as a call to fairness, a form of reciprocal justice, but within Christian teaching, it is generally understood as something more fundamental, a principle of alignment with divine nature. In this view, what one gives out returns, not always immediately, and not necessarily in expected form, but as part of a larger, unseen pattern. This is not a transactional system. It is not about earning favor. It is described as a reflection of God's own character, one that is generous, consistent, and unlimited. Galatians 6:7 reinforces this idea. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. In other words, you can't fake it. You can't plant one seed and expect a different fruit to grow. If your actions are driven by selfishness, resentment, or false motives, you can't expect the result to be sweet. You might fool others for a while, but you can't fool the structure that governs reality. I once knew a woman, a single mom, raising 3 kids, working 2 jobs. Despite this, she consistently brought meals to her sick neighbors. She did not do this for recognition. She did it because, for her, it was simply the right thing to do. Years later, when she was diagnosed with cancer, people she had helped, many of whom she no longer remembered, appeared in her life again. They organized support, they brought food, they prayed. Her earlier generosity returned, though it had never been requested. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. John 3:16. One act of divine generosity, one offering that went across eternity. Humanity was given eternal life because God gave first. That's the principle of heaven on a cosmic scale. In this sense, Jesus did not simply teach the principle, He embodied it. Giving wasn't a command, it was his essence. In Christian theology, giving is not just encouraged, it is described as core to God's identity. And if human beings are made in that image, the implication is straightforward. What we give matters, because it reflects the nature we were created to carry. Giving is godly. And in the end, when it comes to final judgment, the world won't measure what you claimed, it will measure what you gave. The same principle, that what is given returns, often in greater measure, appears in Islamic teaching as well. Whoever comes with a good deed will have 10 times the like thereof. This suggests a system in which good actions are not only acknowledged, but amplified. Even small deeds, when done sincerely, are said to return tenfold. The emphasis here is not on scale, but on intention. In this context, the idea of reciprocity is not symbolic, it is quantified. A second verse, the example of those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah is like a seed of grain which grows 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains. 1 seed, 700 returns. Not because the act was big, but because the intention was pure. The system, in other words, scales with sincerity. The return is not mechanical, it is conditional upon intention, and that is the key: intention. Take the story of Miles Eckert. An 8-year-old boy finds a $20 bill in a parking lot. He could have spent it on something for himself, a game, a snack, anything. He thinks about his father, a fallen soldier. Rather than spending it, he gave it to a nearby soldier, along with a handwritten note. "Dear soldier, my dad was a soldier. He's in heaven now. We like to pay it forward in my family." The act was small, but the effect, in terms of human connection and emotional impact, was considerable. In gratitude, if you are grateful, I will surely increase you. In judgment, so whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. And the hadith reminds us, in intention, actions are but by intentions, and every person will get what they intended. Words, thoughts, and motives, even if subtle, are acknowledged. Buddhism presents a similar framework, although it does not use the language of heaven or divine reward. Instead, the tradition describes a system governed by karma, a relationship between cause and effect, intention and outcome. The structure, while culturally distinct, is conceptually consistent with what we've seen in other traditions. Within this view, every intentional action, whether expressed through thought, speech, or behavior, is considered to generate consequences. These consequences may manifest immediately. More often, they unfold over time, but the belief remains consistent. Actions leave traces, and eventually those traces return to the source. With our thoughts, we make the world. This statement is not meant poetically. Rather, it reflects the belief that internal states shape external experience. This is not theory, it's observable. Your irritation in the morning, the small snap at someone who didn't deserve it, travels with you throughout the day. Just as a single act of patience, unnoticed by anyone but you, can soften everything that follows. The Buddhist formulation of this principle is often phrased as, this arises, that arises, this ceases, that ceases. In practice, this is interpreted as a statement of interdependence. One event sets the conditions for another. There is no isolated action. All behavior occurs within a network of influence. According to this view, to offer kindness is not simply to perform a good deed, it is to initiate a sequence that tends to generate more of the same. To project hostility is to participate in the conditions that sustain it. What results is not a reward system, but a feedback mechanism, not a judgment, but a reflection. Even simple nature demonstrates the principle of heaven perfectly. Water nourishes all things, yet asks for nothing. The sun rises and shines not with judgment, but with certainty. Its light falls on saints and sinners alike. Trees bear fruit for anyone who passes friend or foe. Nothing in nature gives to get. It gives because it is. Just like gravity pulls, fire gives heat, wind moves, and in that giving, everything is sustained. Synthesis. If you look closely, a pattern appears. The hermit lives it. The believer is taught it. The seeker experiences it. And nature just is it. Whether called karma, divine justice, the Tao, or spiritual reciprocity, the structure is the same. This principle doesn't care about belief. It responds to what you are, your intention, energy, and actions. This law, if it can be called that, doesn't announce itself, but it's always been active, quietly shaping outcomes, embedded in the background of everything. It shows up in your habits, in the way you carry yourself, even in the thoughts that surface moments before you speak. And if it's ignored, It doesn't retaliate, it doesn't punish, it simply reflects. What you put out is returned, often not immediately and rarely in the same form, but the echo arrives, and that reflection, subtle as it may seem, doesn't just shape your personal outcomes, it extends further, influencing your relationships, the environment you operate in, and the assumptions passed on to those around you. Children, especially, inherit the atmosphere long before they inherit the language. They learn what to expect from the world based on what they observe in you, not what you say, but what you repeatedly embody. It's a feedback loop, a law baked into the architecture of reality. But here's where most people get stuck. They ask for respect, while showing very little of it. They chase wealth without offering anything of real value. They long for love, yet keep themselves emotionally barricaded. That's the inversion trap, a pattern where people try to receive before becoming the kind of person that would naturally attract what they're asking for. They look into the mirror of life, hoping it will shift on its own, all while refusing to adjust the reflection they're giving it to work with. The belief that outcomes precede embodiment, that the reward can come before the change. But the mirror doesn't work like that. It waits, and it just reflects. If what you give is what you receive, then the real shift doesn't come from trying harder, but from tuning in. But how does a principle this vast become something you can actually work with in your own life? Simple, using modern technology. You can use AI not as a gimmick, but as a kind of mirror, a neutral observer, an advisor with no agenda beyond clarity. With the right prompt, you can begin a conversation, not just with the machine, but with yourself. One that reveals why life may not be reflecting what you've hoped for. Simply copy and paste the prompt into AI, follow the questions it gives you, and answer honestly. After the interview, it will figure out how the principle of heaven plays into your personal life, and give you clear solutions on how to adapt and begin to understand why life isn't reflecting your desires. If you want to test it for yourself, I have put the prompt in the description so you can copy it and begin right away. And that's all it really comes down to. What you give, intentionally or unconsciously, finds its way back. Maybe not from the direction you expected or in the form you were hoping for, but it returns. So if life is a mirror and energy is a ripple, then the only real question becomes, what have you truly been giving? Not in what you say, not in what you claim to believe, but in how you show up, in who you've been, consistently, quietly, beneath the surface. So take a moment, not to answer, but just to notice. And if something clicks, let me know in the comments.